If you grew up in South Carolina, or your parents did, there's a chance your family once drove through towns that don't even exist anymore. Places where people went to church, ran small stores, and raised their kids, until one day the town was simply gone, flooded, abandoned, or erased. These are 13 South Carolina towns that disappeared, and number 4 will honestly blow your mind. Number 13, Glen Springs, Spartanburg County. Most people have never heard of Glen Springs, and it's honestly a shame, because for about 100 years, this tiny corner of Spartanburg County was one of the most important social destinations in the entire state. It started in the early 1800s when soldiers discovered that bathing in a local sulfur spring seemed to clear up their skin ailments. Word spread fast. By 1827, John B. Glenn had bought the land and opened an inn. By 1838, a grand hotel stood in its place, and it became wildly popular with the people who ran South Carolina. Senators, governors, judges, they all spent entire summers here. The hotel had a ballroom, an Italian band, and piazzas stretching 580 feet across the front. 2 trains ran daily from Spartanburg. They bottled the spring water and shipped it across the country. Guests called it the unofficial capital of South Carolina, because that's where the political deals got made every summer. George Washington himself reportedly stopped there on his way through the South. Then the automobile arrived. People didn't need to stay in one place for the whole summer anymore. The Great Depression gutted the hotel financially, and fire took what was left on July 25, 1941. It was never rebuilt. A few buildings still stand today: a church, an old store, the post office, kept alive by a small local preservation group. But the world that needed Glen Springs is long gone. The buildings are still there. What held them together isn't. Number 12, Chappells, Newberry County. Chappells is what happens when a town simply runs out of luck. It was named for the Chappell family, who'd been running the ferry crossing on the Saluda River since the 1750s. By its peak, it had a railroad depot, cotton brokerages, a bank, a hotel, a doctor, and a main street moving 8,500 bales of cotton every single year. Then the disasters piled up. A tornado in 1884 wiped out every business and knocked a train off the tracks. The town rebuilt. Fires hit in the early 1900s. The town rebuilt again. A flood in 1928. Then the state routed a new highway bridge right past Main Street. No detour, no access road, just gone. Businesses moved where the traffic went. Families followed. Chappells quietly stopped being a town. Walk Old Main Street today, and the brick storefronts are still there, leaning into each other, windows dark, trees growing through what used to be floors. A post office still operates. A few families live nearby, but the town that once stood here got hit so many times it ran out of ways to stand back up. Number 11, Pinckneyville, Union County. Here's one most people have absolutely no idea exists. A genuine ghost town sitting deep in the woods of Union County, completely separated from society, 2 miles from the nearest house. In 1791, the South Carolina legislature created a new backcountry district and needed a capital city. They picked a bluff above the Broad River, named it Pinckneyville, and laid it out using Charleston as the blueprint. Meeting Street, Broad Street, Trad Street. They intended this to become the Charleston of the upstate. By 1795, it had a courthouse, a jail, a post office, a school, and an inn, governing 4 counties. Then in 1800, just 9 years after it was founded, the legislature abolished the district and moved the courthouse to Union. 9 years, that was all it got. Without the courthouse, there was no reason to be there. But here's the part nobody tells you. 2 families bought up most of what remained, the McMahons and the Taylors, and spent the rest of their lives in a spectacular feud. When Thomas Taylor died, he arranged to be buried directly in front of McMahon's house so his neighbor would face his grave every single morning. McMahon died 16 years later, having never moved. Today, it's a lone chimney, some foundation stones, and a small marker placed by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1936. It's also on the National Register of Historic Places, which at this point is basically just a certificate for rubble. The Charleston of the upstate never became anything at all. Number 10, Dorchester, Dorchester County. This one goes back further than almost anything else on this list. and the ruins are still there if you know where to look. In 1696, Puritan settlers from Dorchester, Massachusetts, sailed south, received 4,000 acres along the Ashley River, and named their settlement after home. For 70 years it worked. 40 houses, a school, a library, a fort built from tabby concrete made from oyster shells and lime, one of the only surviving colonial-era tabby structures left in the entire country, a legitimate trading center by 1770. Then the Revolution came. But honestly, Dorchester was already dying before a single shot was fired. The original founding congregation had already packed up and relocated to Georgia in the 1750s, leaving the town hollowed out from within. Dorchester was an American post at the start of the war, briefly commanded by Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox himself. The British captured it near the end. On their way out in December 1781, they burned the church. After the war, the founding families simply left, stripping bricks from abandoned buildings to use in new construction elsewhere. By 1788, it was gone. The 1886 earthquake, epicenter less than a mile away, destroyed nearly everything remaining, all except the church bell tower. It still stands today inside colonial Dorchester State Historic Site, where archaeologists are still actively digging and still pulling up pieces of a town that lasted 70 years and vanished. Number 9. Andersonville, Anderson County. Most people driving past Lake Hartwell have absolutely no idea there's a whole town sitting at the bottom of it. Andersonville was founded in 1801, where the Seneca and Tougaloo rivers joined to form the Savannah, named for Revolutionary War hero Robert Anderson, who helped commission the town, and one of the most promising locations in the entire upstate. By 1812, it had a 40-room hotel, a cotton gin, a wool factory, a gun factory, and 12 stores. It was thriving. Then the floods hit. A massive flood in 1840 swept away the mills. The town rebuilt. A second flood in 1852 destroyed them again. And this time they stayed down because the railroads were pushing through the upstate and Andersonville wasn't on any of them. Commerce bled out. The post office closed in 1893. Then the Army Corps of Engineers announced a dam at Hartwell. Andersonville sat directly in the flood path. Families got condemnation prices with zero negotiation. Most graves were moved to higher ground, not all. One family's cemetery ended up on a small island in the lake. Cemetery Island. The graves are still there, only accessible by boat. The rest of Andersonville is 60 to 90 feet below Lake Hartwell. Founded 1801, gone by 1962. Number 8. Old Pickens, Pickens County. Old Pickens is a story about what happens when a town gets stripped to its bones and a lake swallows the rest. For the first half of the 1800s, it was the actual seat of Pickens County. Courthouse, jail, newspaper, stores. Then in 1868, the county seat moved 14 miles east to a new town called Pickens. Workers arrived and dismantled the courthouse brick by brick and hauled it down the road. They left the church. The old Presbyterian church stood alone beside the cemetery while everything around it was taken apart and carted away. Then Duke Power came for Lake Keowee. Old Pickens sat right on the Keowee River, directly in the flood path. Graves were moved. Families received government-set prices. What wasn't moved was flooded. The church survived. Just enough high ground. The churchyard still holds original graves alongside ones Duke Power relocated from beneath the lake. A county seat reduced to a single church at the edge of a man-made lake. The only building left standing is the one they didn't bother to take. Number 7. Ferguson, Orangeburg County. Ferguson is one of those places that honestly feels unbelievable when you hear the full story. A thriving town that got built, stripped bare, and then literally drowned, with one piece still sticking up out of the water today. In 1881, 2 Chicago businessmen spotted 165,000 acres of ancient bald cypress forest in South Carolina, selling for as little as $2 an acre. They bought it all, built a mill on the Santee River, and then built an entire town around it. Ferguson had paved streets, indoor plumbing, gas street lamps, a hotel, a church, a school, and a hospital. At its peak, 2,500 people lived there. Workers were paid in company scrip redeemable only at the company store, completely trapped. Those script coins still turn up on eBay and at antique dealers today. The cypress went fast. By 1915, the forests were gone. Trees that in some cases had been growing for over 1,000 years, cleared in 3 decades. The mill shut down, and the post office closed in 1917. The founder had gone blind and poured over $600,000 of his own money trying to save it. He died in 1924 with nothing. In 1941, Lake Marion filled and covered what was left, almost entirely. The old brick kiln, built on a ridge just high enough to stay above the waterline, still stands today on Ferguson Island. You can paddle out and see it poking up out of the water. A single chimney, the only monument to a town built, stripped, abandoned, and drowned in less than 60 years. Number 6. Dunbarton, Barnwell County. Most people who know the story of Ellenton have never heard of Dunbarton, and that's exactly the problem. It was Ellenton's neighbor, about 300 residents, 2 schools, a church, 15 commercial buildings, families who had farmed that land for 2 and 3 generations. On November 28, 1950, when the government announced the Savannah River site, Dunbarton was inside the boundary alongside Ellenton and 4 other small communities, Myers Mill, Hawthorne, Robbins, and Lee. Every single one of them was cleared within 15 months. Dunbarton had even fewer resources than Ellenton to push back. No famous sign, no song written about it, no play. Just families packing what they could, accepting whatever the government decided their land was worth, and leaving. Today its name has been almost entirely swallowed by the story of Ellenton. A footnote to a footnote. The land is federal property. You cannot enter it. 300 people lived there. They had names, kitchens, gardens, neighbors they'd known their whole lives. Nobody wrote them a song. Number 5. Hamburg, Aiken County. Hamburg is one of the most layered stories on this entire list. A town that died twice, was rebuilt by people who had every reason not to bother, and then was destroyed a second time anyway. Henry Schultz arrived in South Carolina from Germany with almost nothing. By 1821, he'd built a town directly across the Savannah River from Augusta, just to compete with the city he felt had wronged him. He named it Hamburg, after home. By 1833, Hamburg was the western terminus of the South Carolina Canal and Railroad. At the time, the longest railroad under single management in the world. Cotton poured in from across the upstate. Then, in 1853, the railroad extended its line across the river into Augusta. Hamburg became irrelevant overnight. White merchants left. The town emptied, but here's the part nobody tells you. After the Civil War, freedmen rebuilt Hamburg into something genuinely remarkable. Prince Rivers, formerly enslaved, taught himself to read and write and became the town's judge. Samuel Lee, the first black speaker of the South Carolina House, governed here. Together with Charles Hayne, they founded Aiken County, integrated the schools, and built a real community from almost nothing. On July 4, 1876, Hamburg's black militia marched through town in celebration of the centennial. 2 white men demanded the militia step aside. 4 days later, over 100 armed men showed up. When it was over, 5 black men had been captured and killed without trial. A future governor of South Carolina later described the event with pride. The legislature repealed Hamburg's charter in the months that followed. Floods in 1929 finished what the violence had started. The man who bragged about orchestrating the attack, Ben Tillman, went on to become a U.S. Senator for 24 years, and his statue stood inside the South Carolina State House until 2023. Today, expensive homes and a golf course line the riverbank where Hamburg stood. There is a monument there to the one white man who died. Number 4. Jocassee Valley, Oconee County. This one will genuinely blow your mind, not just because of what the valley was, but because of how it disappeared. Jocassee is a Cherokee word meaning place of the lost one. The name comes from a love story about a chief's daughter who walked into the water to meet the ghost of her warrior and never came back. The Cherokee gave this name to a stunning valley in the Blue Ridge foothills of Oconee County, where 4 mountain rivers ran clear and cold long before any European settlers arrived. By the 20th century, Jocassee Valley was a living, breathing community. Farms, churches, schools, camps, and lodges, with families who had been there for 5 and 6 generations. Here's what makes this story almost unbelievable. Starting in the 1920s, Duke Power began quietly buying land through a shell company that never mentioned Duke's name, without telling a single resident what they were planning. For decades, by the time people understood what was actually happening, most of the land around them was already gone. On January 2, 1965, Duke Power announced it was going to flood the valley. Some families fought. One man got a restraining order stopping Duke from bulldozing his property. Duke flooded around him. The Atakula Lodge is still there, resting on its side at the bottom of the lake, over 300 feet down in complete darkness. By 1973, the valley was gone. Mount Carmel Baptist Cemetery, the one filmed for the movie Deliverance, sits 130 feet underwater. Divers confirm the headstones are still standing, some names still legible. The stone entrance pillars to Camp Jocassee for girls are down there too, the white picket fence still standing in the cold and dark. Thousands of divers travel from across the southeast every year just to see what's left. The Cherokee named this place Place of the Lost One, centuries before any of this happened. Number 3. Keowee, Oconee County. Before Lake Keowee. Before Duke Power. Before there was a state of South Carolina. There was a Cherokee town called Keowee, and most people have absolutely no idea it's sitting right beneath one of the most popular lakes in the state. Keowee means Place of the Mulberries. It stood on the Keowee River in the far northwest corner of South Carolina, the largest of the 7 Cherokee Lower towns, and the actual capital of the entire Cherokee Lower Nation. A major center of trade and governance for an entire civilization. In 1753, the English built Fort Prince George directly across the river. In 1760, British forces destroyed the town entirely. The Cherokee rebuilt. A new Keowee rose nearby. They stayed. Over the following decades, the Cherokee signed this land away piece by piece through treaties made under pressure. In 1816, the last strip was sold to the U.S. government for $5,000. A century and a half later, Duke Power came for it again, acquiring over 83,000 acres for roughly $29 an acre. In 1971, the Keowee Dam was completed and the lake filled. Archaeologists pulled out what they could. Thousands of artifacts, pottery, beads, and human remains from burial grounds that had held the Cherokee dead for generations. 200 feet below Lake Keowee today sit both Keowee Old Town and Keowee New Town. Fort Prince George is down there. The burial ground is down there. The capital of the Cherokee Lower Nation, erased twice, 200 years apart. Number 2. Ellenton, Aiken County. Ellenton is one of the most gut-wrenching stories I've ever come across, and the fact that most people have never heard of it is honestly unbelievable. For 80 years, it was a quiet farming town on the Savannah River, named for Mary Ellen Dunbar, the daughter of the man who donated the land. Good neighbors. The first town in South Carolina to have automatic telephone dialing. People who had lived there their entire lives, whose parents and grandparents had lived there their entire lives. On November 28, 1950, the government told them they had to leave. A major Cold War production facility had been approved, the Savannah River Plant. They needed 300 square miles of protected land. Ellenton, Dunbarton, and 4 smaller communities sat directly inside the boundary. Over 6,000 people were given 15 months to go. The government paid $19 million for 210,000 acres, even though the timber alone was valued at $28 million. Homeowners got condemnation prices, renters got nothing. Before they left, someone in Ellenton put up a sign. It said, "It is hard to understand why our town must be destroyed to make a weapon that will destroy someone else's town that they love just as much as we love ours. But we feel that they picked not just the best spot in the U.S., but in the world." A family named Johnson wrote a song called "The Death of Ellenton" in 1951. A play was written. Reunions are still held every year. Families come back and stand near a road marker on Highway 125 next to concrete slabs and street curbs that lead nowhere. And remember, the youngest people at those reunions are in their 70s now. And the land where Ellenton stood, still an active federal nuclear site, still off limits, 75 years later. Number 1. what these towns share. Number 1 isn't a single town. It's the thing every town on this list has in common, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every single one of them, taken, flooded, bypassed, or abandoned the moment the economy stopped needing it. The people who lived in them were never the ones making the decisions. The government decided it needed the land, the power company decided it needed the valley, the railroad decided the grade was easier somewhere else, and the families, the farmers, the store owners, the teachers, the ministers, got a letter or a knock at the door or a notice in the paper, and that was that. If you're in your 60s or 70s right now, there is a real chance your family came from somewhere that no longer exists. Maybe it's a town on this list. Maybe it's somewhere that never made any list at all. Maybe your grandmother mentioned a house on a river, or a valley in the mountains, or a little main street that isn't there anymore and never said much else about it. That history belongs to you. The fact that the world moved on without leaving a marker doesn't make it less real. These towns were real. The people in them were real. What happened to them was real. And as long as somebody is still saying their names, they're never completely gone. Drop a comment and tell me what forgotten town in your state we should cover next. I read every single one. And if this kind of history matters to you, subscribe. We do this every week.